Yes, yes, yes. Welcome back to another episode of Act Root to Fruit. My name is Marcel Tassara, and I'm trying to be a behavior analyst. Right now, I'm a psychologist, which means that I think, Kate, does it kind of, when I say that, do you hear me say like that my scope of practice is limited to what happens up here?
Yes, and you're pointing to your head.
Yes, I'm pointing my head. Yes,
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I think that when most people hear psychology, in air quotes, that they hear that you are focused on what people are thinking and saying about their own behavior.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because it took me a few years to figure. I don't know if I'm accurate in my figuring out, but when I heard people like Kelly Wilson say, "I'm a behavior analyst," or DJ Moran say, "I'm a behavior analyst," I just didn't equate. And I think that what I'm learning, the more I learn about this field, the roots of ACT and what is behind the hexaflex, is that behavior analysis has to do with everything that is the human is doing, and maybe saying psychology is too limiting.
I don't know if psychology is too limiting. I think that there are certain branches of psychology that see themselves as only studying one thing. I mean, I consider myself as a student of psychology. I
Okay.
particularly see myself as having a particular philosophical stance, and that is one based in behaviorism, radical behaviorism, or inner behaviorism.
Yeah.
When I examine philosophical phenomenon. So, I think if you ask the person on the street, although we don't get to ask people on the street right now much,
Yeah.
I think that if you ask the person on the street what psychologists do, they talk to people about talking about stuff. When you ask them what a behavior analyst do, they either don't know or they think they focus on kids with autism.
Mm-hmm.
And working with kids with autism is an incredibly important job. It's just not the job I do.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the job you do? And actually, before before I answer that, this is Dr. Kate Kellum. Let me introduce you. Hi. She's waving for those of you who can't see her. I get to do that to you too. And Kate is a professor at Ole Miss. Is that?
It is. So the University of Mississippi has a couple of names. The University of Mississippi is what we use when we're talking about the academic functions. And then Ole Miss is what we use when we're talking about the athletic functions.
I see.
There's a whole lot of history about why that might be problematic that we do not need to get into on this.
Okay.
But I want people to know I know that it might be problematic.
Okay, you're with them. And what else I want to say? Kate has awesome pirated motto that world domination through peace, love, and understanding.
Yeah, I totally stole that.
Yeah, Kelly Wilson, another Ole Miss or University of Mississippi comrade, and so she's been consulting with schools, universities, and nonprofits all over the place, United States, UK, for over 15 years to help improve their ability to implement contextual changes and measure learning and organizational outcomes. She's a behavior analyst from the University of Nevada, Reno, and she has some cool friends behind her too.
Me too. So my green screen has rats in an operant chamber having a little party, and I love it a lot.
Yeah. So we were talking about that word behavior. There's a certain pride to saying I'm a behavior analyst. I feel like there's a certain lore to that within ACT, right?
That's interesting. I think within the ACBS, the Association of Contextual Behavioral Science, I think there is kind of beginning to look back up to these behavioral roots. And there's a whole lot of psychology who see behavior analysts as behind the times, as not looking into the black box. So I think it sort of depends on what world in psychology you're living in. But I think in ACBS, there are ways of speaking that have brought attention to behavior analysis as a thing that people might want to know more about.
Okay. Yeah. And so Where do you think we should start out in our journey today?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, Perhaps with one thought I've been having when I've been listening to these amazing podcasts, and I've only listened to a
Thank
few.
you. Thank you.
No, they're great.
Thank you.
I'm not. One thing about me is I don't lie. You know? So they're great. And one thought I've had kind of consistently throughout is I'm wondering if we're really starting people in the right place.
Okay.
Is providing and, and and I cannot know because I can only talk about there is the behavior analysis kind of leaking out. Tact just means talking about stuff. I can only talk about stuff that is in my own experience, and in my own experience, learning about behavior analysis did not come from opening the Catania learning book, which is a fantastic learning book.
Yeah.
Do not get me wrong, but that was not my first step in learning about behavior analysis. And I'm not even sure I can talk about or identify, or I'm going to use that word again, tact, the first step I took, right? So one thing I've been thinking while I've been listening to you and your amazing guest is, are we talking about the right step? And I'm thinking maybe we go to something that instructional designers talk about a lot, which is backwards design. And so backwards design just means picking an organism. Let's just limit ourselves to humans instead of rats here because we're talking about behavior. So picking a human, deciding what it is you want them to be able to do when you're finished with them. Measuring what they can do and figuring out what contextual changes to get them to where you want them to be. So pick an organism, pick some behaviors, measure that behavior, and then change the environment to get them to get there. And so one thing, if we're going to pick an organism, let's pick a listener. Pick what we want them to do. We want them to approach the world as if the big controlling variables around behavior is in the environment rather than inside. So if and I'm making an assumption here, if what we want people to do is look to the environment for what's going on with a behavior rather than inside. So we're going to pick an organism. We're going to pick the behavior we want them to do. We're going to measure if they can do that thing, and then we're going to change the environment. So I'm going to make some assumptions. The organism is going to be the humans that are listening to this.
Yeah.
The behavior is going to be looking to the context instead of inside a human as the cause of their behavior.
Okay.
I'm using that word cause very loosely. So if the behavior we want our listeners to be able to do is look to the context to see what they can manipulate to change behavior rather than see something as broken or wrong inside a human. Once we do that, we've picked an organism, we've picked a behavior. Now we got to measure how well they can do that thing, right? And that's hard to do at a grand scale, but let's assume that most people listening are at least intrigued by the idea, but maybe not great at seeing contingencies.
Yeah.
Then we've got to change the environment to help them do that thing, right? So how can we change that environment? One way we can change that environment is present reading material. And I don't mean to be picking on Charlie. Charlie Catania, brilliant. His book is brilliant, but it's probably not the best first step.
Yeah.
So
slightly aversive to someone trying to learn this is what you're saying.
Probably. Well, and even people who were very well developed, I mean, it's written in a way to really dive into each of these concepts rather than help people develop the kind of general ways of thinking. So based on my own experience, I think practicing this with less complicated organisms or less complicated behaviors is probably a good way to do that.
Okay.
And I'm basing this not only on my own experience, but my own experience of teaching. So I teach lots and lots of undergrads. And none of them come out as great behavior. Well, some of them come out as great behavior analysts after they do further training, but most of them do not leave my class as like a behavior analyst, but they leave my class starting to be able to see how to think this way. And I think an important part of that, some of the activities that I see really change how people behave are things like clicker training and tag teach.
Okay.
So clicker training involves taking a sound or a light or some stimulus and putting it in temporal spatial proximity with something good and appetitive. So click food, then using that click and the food, don't forget the food, that's important. Click food, use that click to shape up the behaviors you want in like a nonverbal organism. So to get my cat to give me high five, I might click treat. This is similar to tag teach, TAG, teach, teaching with acoustical guidance. Because people don't like it when you use the same term to describe teaching animals as you do humans. So they came up with another word.
Because we're not animals, right?
Because apparently we're not animals. Although your other podcast would suggest differently.
Yeah.
So either of these things give people an opportunity to try out very simple manipulations in the environment and watching a behavior of an organism. So there are multiple great videos on these things, but anything on clicker training or anything on tag teach, there's lots of YouTube videos on these. And I really think that practicing this behavior with a nonverbal response helps organism learn to look to the environment first. Okay. Because I think as soon as people start talking, and again, I have no data on this, but it feels like as soon as people start talking, we start looking inside and we start thinking about our own self-talk and start seeing the cause of their behavior inside them, which is fine. I mean, the cause of their behavior could be inside of them, but I can't do anything about that. I can't like go I can't do a Vulcan mind meld or pour myself inside your skin and make you do what I want to do yet. I mean, and Skinner was kind of funny about this. He used this term, the physiologist of the future. And it's really hard to, in our own time, know if he was being sarcastic or if he meant it, but we can't right now. I can't pour myself into your skin and make you ask me the questions I want you to ask me. I don't even know what I want.
So we're still talking about the listeners though to this, right?
Yeah. And so if the listeners want to get better at seeing contingencies, I think they need to practice doing that. And I think I personally think one of the easiest way to practice that is with clicker training or tag teach. Okay. Now then they get into, but that's a whole lot simpler than psychotherapy, or, but that's a whole lot simpler than teaching. Yes, that's the point, is to practice this behavior. Practice this, putting the cause, I'm using that loosely, of behavior in the context rather than inside the organism. And even when you're clicker training, you might find yourself slipping into, my cat doesn't like these treats, or my cat isn't blah, 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 or it's not food motivated. Okay, that just means you're not using a good enough appetitive. And I think these kind of simpler behaviors will teach you to hone those skills. And I don't know that, but it has taught my students and it's taught me to hone those skills to be able to apply it to more complicated situations.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so could you say, kind of break down what is happening in that clicker training from a kind of functional perspective? The ABCs?
Sure. Yeah, well, okay. Well, I think there's ABCs and there's one category that gets left out a lot. So antecedents, behaviors, consequences, and future occurrence, because the key to whether or not a consequence worked is what happens in the future, not what happens in the moment. So let's say I'm teaching a new kitten to do high five. At first, I wouldn't even have the antecedent of high five. I'd have an antecedent of a little bit of tasty stuff in my hand,
Okay.
just out of reach of its mouth. And, what are cats going to do? They're going to try to touch it, right? And they're going to try to get it to their mouth. And as soon as they do that, I'm going to click and give them the treat.
Okay.
Click treat. So the antecedent there was an approximation of what I wanted. I'm going to put something tasty in my hand.
Yeah.
The behavior is their hand, cats do not have hands. I know they do not. Their paws hits my hand, and then I'm going to click and treat. Now, the only way I know that was reinforcement, that click and treat worked, is if they do it again, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to push on that behavior by applying a click and treat. And if they do it again, it was probably reinforcement. If they don't, then it was either a neutral or an aversive.
Okay. Okay.
And so I'm going to do that until the cat is, I've raised my hand without something tasty on it, and the cat puts their paw on it, and then I'm going to click and treat. And then eventually I'm going to add the antecedent of high five. I'm going to say high five, raise my hand, and the cat will pop it without me doing anything.
Okay.
All of that time, I'm clicking and treating when the cat does what I want. But also, when the cat doesn't do whatever behavior I'm aiming for, I'm not going to yell at it. I mean, it's a cat. It doesn't know what I want it to do. It's not at fault if it doesn't do the right thing. I'm going to change the environment. So clicker trainers click what works, and they don't click what doesn't work. Okay. Right? So if it doesn't work, you take a break and you come back later. I think it's sort of similar, and people don't like it when you talk like this. It's sort of similar to complex human behavior. If you're trying to get a new behavior develop increase of behavior with a complicated verbal human, you click what works and you don't click what doesn't work. It's so hard for us not to click what doesn't work. It's easy for us to see that people thrashing around and doing stuff that we don't want. And when we see it, it's so hard not to comment on it. Like what happens in psychotherapy, even with you can differentially reinforce what a human is talking about.
Yeah. So
it's really important not to click what doesn't work, right? And it's hard. I think it's hard to do that, which is why I think it's easier to practice with simpler organisms or simpler behaviors.
Yeah, I really appreciate that idea. It makes makes sense, right? I mean, when you're learning something new, whether that's I don't know, diving or swimming, you're going to start with what's most simple,
right?
Basic.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, okay. So I forgot to mention that I love your website. I see contingencies. I take it you're a Sixth Sense fan and Sixth Sense fan. And I wonder if we could just backtrack a little bit and I'd like you to answer just some basic questions around contingencies. Like, what is a contingency? How does someone who comes to a behavioral point perspective understand this? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, contingencies have a technical definition, but that's not important here. I think what's important here is a contingency is any change in the environment that impacts behavior.
Okay. And the change in the environment from our perspective here can be outside of the skin or inside of the skin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's important. The skin is arbitrary.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The skin is arbitrary.
Okay.
And I'm going to go on a tangent and just stop me in a second if you need me to. But
is that a roller coaster in Mississippi?
Yeah, it's good. That's good. So, the stuff we like, and even okay. Back up again. So I'm
feeling some excitement. I love it.
So I don't necessarily take a radical behavioral perspective on everything.
Okay.
Often I take neurobehaviorally informed perspective, and not straight up cancer. He's been dead for a while, but and Skinner's been dead for a while too. But often I take that kind of stance. But how does that differ? Oh yeah, we don't want to get into.
No, well, okay. So, what would be like if you're reading a book on inner behaviorism at Waffle House, and the server comes and asks you, what are you reading for?
Yeah.
What would be your 2-sentence or 3-sentence?
So you're reading to understand the current interaction of the current behaving organism and the current stimulation of the environment. So you're trying to look at the current interaction of the behaving organism and the stimulation. So I don't think this is going to be useful long term, but from interbehavioral perspective, the unit of analysis is that interaction of behavior and context rather than behavior and context. And from a radical behavioral perspective, the unit of analysis is the behavior.
Okay. Well, my head will explode if I ask you to. I'm gonna have to go back and
let's go back.
Listen to
Let's
that in slow motion.
So where I was going was about, knowing, even from a radical behavioral perspective, the within the skin and without the skin is kind of arbitrary. Skinner, in his 45 paper that lots of contextual behavioral scientists quote a lot, talked about self-knowledge. And the way we learn self-knowledge is through mostly collateral stimulation or context and through collateral behaviors. So the way we learn to talk about what's happening within the skin is because we were doing stuff, or the environment was doing stuff that people helped us learn to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think one of his examples, or one of Linda Hayes's examples, was, you got a kid who comes to you, they're crying and they're bleeding from their knee. Okay, there's a collateral behavioral crying and a collateral stimulus bleeding from their knee. From that, we teach them to say, your knee hurts, you fell down, right? Those persist even when we get better at talking about what's going on in our environment or within our skin. Those kind of collateral behavior and shared context persist. So I suspect, I think you have children, right?
Yeah, 4 and 2.
Yeah, okay. 4 and 2?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So my guess is you can look at them. You can just look at one of them and see if they're happy, sad, mad, or about to lose it, right? you just know. And how do you know? You're not psychic. Well, you might be psychic, but I doubt you're psychic. You know, because they're exhibiting overt behaviors that allow you to make a guess about the internal stimulation that they're experiencing. Or something dramatic, like we're all in a shared pandemic right now. It's a pretty good guess that people are not at their best, right? You can kind of say, hey, how's it going from across the street? And people, they're like, making it, I'm doing okay. Wait, you can assume some access to the stuff happening within the skin based on the behaviors that appear, their collateral behaviors, and your shared context. So the within the skin, without the skin is not, I don't think it's a hard line. I think that particularly in psychotherapy, once you learn to interact with that human and you learn their collateral behaviors and you've built a context that you share, you have more and more guesses about the stuff that's happening within the skin.
Okay. So we went down this road talking about contingencies. And if you could, again, could you tell me, I really liked it. I want it to be reinforced here. What is a contingency?
Contingency is anything that, any environmental event that changes behavior, that impacts behavior.
Okay.
And that environmental event could be within or without the skin.
Okay. Go ahead. No? Okay. So we want to get good at seeing them, right? That apparently, per your domain name, it's important.
Maybe. I mean, that's what I try to train my undergraduate students and even the beginning clinical psychology students to do, is I try to change them to do that, because my own history has taught me that for myself, doing so is appetitive. It is effective at changing the world in ways that I want to change.
Okay. All right. And I guess I gather that Shamu has something to teach us about this as well.
Okay, this is a great book, and there's a brief article.
Uh-huh.
Amy Sutherland
Yeah,
wrote an
I'll put
article.
links in the
Yeah,
show
she
notes.
wrote an article in the New York Times for a while. It was the most linked, cited article that was ever written in the New York Times. I'm sure there are more dramatic things that are happening now. And then there's a very short book length approach to this. So
Okay.
Amy Sutherland's, I don't remember what the article is called, but the book is what Shamu taught me about life, love, and marriage.
Okay.
And Amy did something similar to what I'm talking about. She went and studied what animal trainers did, and she went particularly with mammal trainers. And then she started to think about the world this way and began to apply it in her own life. And she turned, she invented a verb, to shamu. To shamu just means differentially reinforce.
Okay.
So you click what works and you don't click what doesn't work, right? And so she uses this verb, to shamu, throughout her book. She talks about shamuing or to shamu with her spouse. She talks about doing it with her dogs. She talks about doing it with people out in the world, like there's an interaction at a bank, which is interesting. And one of the reasons I like this book is because it strips away a lot of the behavioral language, which is important in some circumstances.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to learn to apply this stuff, I'm not sure the actual technical terms are all that important. And I think Sutherland does an amazing job of talking about at least the principle of reinforcement and some other things without using those terms.
Okay. Does she know it?
Oh, yeah. She does.
Yeah,
well, she's a journalist. Well, I don't know what she knows. I haven't asked her. She's a journalist, and she spent a long time learning about reinforcement.
Okay. And so to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, I'm wondering, because we are, language able humans, like why not make sure someone understands they're messing up? So
should we tell them, no, that's bad?
Yeah. I mean, if we're, I don't know what the actual words are that communicates that or how that's communicated. But I'm hearing you say, you are communicating that in a sense because it's not being reinforced.
Yes. So one thing that, and this is something students ask a lot, like, why wouldn't you punish a behavior? And let me say, with very dangerous behaviors to themselves or others, I do think that punishment has a place. However, if you have a long history of using reinforcement or appetitives to click to get a behavior to happen more often, the absence of the click is also meaning you're not doing a good job, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So if you have a history of getting clicks and you do something that doesn't get a click, that is functionally similar to getting shocked. Again, I'm not going to shock humans, but if we're taking clicks and shocks, we might not need those shocks.
Okay.
If they have a history of clicks. Without a history of clicks, then I'm not sure it's easy to teach in the absence of those.
I see.
But I think it's fairly, and I suspect even in your own life, it's fairly easy for you to discern when you're getting a lot of clicks, things are going well, appetitives are flowing your way, and then times that maybe no aversives are coming at you, nobody's yelling at you or telling you you're bad or whatever, but you're not getting those clicks. I suspect you can discern that.
Yeah. Okay. And it makes sense that I appreciate that's helpful to think of it that way. And I to follow up on my question, I think that there's something natural about, and I don't know if it's natural or if it's just kind of conditioned in us through some social factors, but like that once I figure it out, then I'm really going to be happy, or I'm going to be free kind of, this kind of like understanding why I do the things that I do. Is that am I communicating my?
I think I might need more words. So let me try, and then you provide feedback to get us to where we want to go.
Okay.
So what I think you're saying is that sometimes a very mild shock or you're doing it wrong might help you identify the correct path and allow you to behave that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're talking, and I could be, is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm thinking, I guess I'm thinking more of like, you know, some of our relatives in psychotherapy, like psychoanalysis, which is really heavily focused on why am I the way I am, kind of. Okay. And I don't know if I guess and I hear it a lot in practice, you know, with clients is, you know, wanting to kind of this pull to kind of, I mean, to me, it's like focusing on why you didn't get the click.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I would like to see information, data, anecdotes about how focusing on that helps you get the click next time.
Okay.
I think it's seductive. I mean, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, the like how did this happen? Is like mental thinking, this internal verbal behavior. It's seductive,
Mhm.
and it may even be appetitive in its own right. I mean, why else would we do it a lot? It's got to be somehow appetitive. It's unclear to me that that seductiveness leads to better behavior. Like
Yeah.
it's unclear to, and again, I don't know. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I mean, you
Mhm.
know, y'all can tell me I'm crazy. That's fine. But it's I don't see that being able to talk about what went wrong in the past, because that's gone. All we
Mhm.
got is right now.
Mhm.
If talking about what went wrong in the past helps you right now, cool. But I'm not sure it does a lot. And I
Okay.
think, particularly from a clinical perspective, what you have access to is what's happening right now. Now, people may be talking about what happened in the past or what they're worried about in the future, but there is nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
There are no contextual changes you can make about that. The
Yeah.
only contextual changes you can make from this perspective is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reason in particular is why I find group psychotherapy to be so powerful, especially process groups, because you get to see in the moment what's happening in, you know, how we function in a group setting.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that comes back to a powerful place like it was before the insurance companies axed it, you know, whenever they did.
Well, that's a pretty powerful contextual change, right? So insurance companies said, no, this isn't going to work anymore. We're not going to pay you for this. So lots of people stopped doing it,
Mm-hmm.
not for any other reason except for the immediate contingencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. And on that note, I think we had talked about doing a little bit of a functional analysis of some of my behavior.
Let's do it.
That's be a good time to mess around with that. And the idea is you know I'm just gonna talk like I mentioned the topic earlier. Just talk about that, and you can ask me questions, and then we'll stop and maybe unpack it. Sound good? Okay. So one of my values is that I want to be kind of alive, and I want to be fully present as much as possible in my life. And that means being authentic. That's a value of mine. And I find myself sometimes in conversations I don't want to be in. And
You mean other people are boring sometimes?
no, everyone I talk to always highly entertaining. No, but really it's my impatience. I recognize that. Like I like hit a wall and I'm like, oh my God, especially right now in my life, I've got a lot of things going on and a lot going on. And so, and I don't think it's like I'm more important than somebody, but I don't know. So I'm, I think it's more about impatience, but it's just like, oh, this conversation is fruitless. And this person is on like a talk track. They're being very inauthentic, and that bothers me. And I want to, I want to, you know, I don't want to spend the energy to, make to change this. And I got to go. I got stuff to do. I got to go. And there's this like churning inside of me that happens. And I guess I try to like kind of communicate that, through my body language that, I'd like to terminate the conversation, discharge the conversation. And but it's a battle between like how I want to be as some of my values in terms of interpersonal values and how I carry myself and just am kind to people. And so that's my behavior.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say in the present moment is talking about other moments in the past, and you're not even talking about a specific moment. You're talking about lots of. I assume it's not just one person that drives you to boredom,
No.
But of course, no one drives you to boredom.
No one.
I assume you're kind of taking a whole stream of behavior that has happened, this interaction of environment and behavior over time, and you're presenting it in some words in front of me right now.
Okay.
So I have some choices. I can take that stream of behavior and talk about that stream of behavior, and I'm perfectly happy to do that.
Yeah.
Or I can talk about the stream of behavior that's happening in front of me right now. Now, so that stream of behavior that's been coming at me through your little bit of verbal behavior that you sometimes feel disconnected. I mean, you were more elegant than this, but you sometimes feel disconnected, but you want to be kind to humans, even though sometimes humans are boring, because sometimes humans are boring. This is true.
This is true.
And sometimes we assign the problem with that other human is inside of them. They're a boring person, right? But often they also there's something in the context that is influencing their own behavior.
Yes.
There's something that's preventing them from being, as you said, authentic in the moment, right? But it's easier to say you're boring. Okay. I can analyze that. So if I'm analyzing that, what I'm hearing you say is that those conversations are not appetitive to you. However, you wish within your skin makes it that you should think that this is an appetitive, right? So talking with another human should be appetitive, right? So you've got something that's aversive, that's talking with this boring person. Again, it's not inside of them, it's, out in the world. You're talking to a boring person, and it should be appetitive, but it's not. And you feel your behavior is both, I want to do this thing, but it's not reinforcing. So your behavior of being authentic in that moment is not being reinforced. Okay. We can make up stories all day long about the antecedent. You're talking to a boring person. The consequence, the behavior was you like moved away or you signaled go away. And the consequence is you got out of that boring conversation. Or maybe even better, they switched to something more interesting, right? And then in the future, when you're talking to a boring person, you're more likely to move away, which gets away from the boring person, which it makes you do that again in the future. Yeah, I mean, we can make up those stories.
Okay.
But what I have access to right now is what we're doing, and me pushing a little bit on how you're behaving. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to talk about an earlier moment. So earlier, you asked me a question that I didn't quite understand, and I tried to rephrase it.
Yeah.
And that was pushing on you a little bit. Okay, like, I'm not behaving in the way I know you want me to behave. So I'm gonna serve up something for you to behave in a way that'll help me behave. And so I think we're doing that now. I mean, and for the listeners, we're actually looking at each other on Zoom, so that helps a lot. So I think we're influencing each other's behavior right now. You served up an antecedent that in the past has been followed by the person who you were listening to providing a functional analysis, which helped you make sense of the world, consequence, which increased the probability that you'd serve up that antecedent again to make sense of the world. And then I say, we can do that. But what's more interesting is us pushing on each other's behavior in the moment. So I behave, which becomes your context, and then you behave, which becomes my context. And each of those contexts can be appetitive, aversive, or neutral. And each of those is going to change how we behave with each other. So I'll get back to your question. And people are boring sometimes.
And I'm one of those people. Some of the
it's the context's fault, you know?
Damn
And,
context.
and
Why don't we blame the context more?
we should. It's
You know?
totally the context's fault. Like well, you know, our learning history, like it's harder to think like this. This is actually, yes, it is harder to think like this because the culture does not teach us this. The culture generally teaches us that when someone does something or a critter does something, it's something inside of them that influences their behavior. And to switch it to start thinking or start seeing contingencies or start seeing the world as it's in the context, that's a hard switch.
Yeah.
And I fail at it all the time. But I succeed at it a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, something that came up for me, and I think this is related, it might not be, but so I noticed that I tend to, like when I have some event happen inside, like a judgment or something like that about myself or someone else, I tend to kind of just ascribe it to my mind. Like, you know, I just blame it on my mind, which there's something about, like, cause I do feel like if you, you know, that's something I think that I've been conditioned to do within ACT is just to do that. You know, I have something that I don't like. So I'm just, oh, that's the stupid mind that's telling me that.
Yeah, and your mind it's just not a thing in and of itself. This like thinking behavior evolved because of the context, right? I mean, and this blaming your mind evolved because the contextual cues around ACT-y stuff, and there are other traditions that do this, but with ACT, it is one way to attribute cause to something. But even within the ACT traditions, no one thinks that mind just appeared suddenly. It's not. It is a behavior. I mean, this thinking is a behavior. It has evolved. This way of thinking has evolved over time, and that behavior, we're really good at it. Evolutionarily, we have been we're set up to be able to hide, fight, seek appetitives, and then our entire learning history has taught us to do that too. And sometimes those behaviors occur just within the skin, just within our mind. And sometimes they occur outside. Sometimes we actually run, fight, or hide. And just when we assign the oh, that's just my mind talking, it's a shorthand way of saying that's my history. That's my learning history doing that.
Okay.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but if I'll have the thought now, oh, Kate is so eloquent, and I'm so grateful to her for coming here to be here and share her wisdom with us. I would say, oh, that's my true self. You know, like that's the other side of that, and I want to ascribe that to the real me. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Is that okay?
I don't think that's harmful. I don't think any of this is harmful. I think where it's harmful is where when it is we're getting paid, or as our job, or as a parent or a spouse, or you know, somehow somebody has assigned us a behaving organism whose behavior we are supposed to influence, either because we're getting paid to do it or because we're parents or whatever, you know. Somehow we have a behaving organism in front of us. I think the problem is when we assign the problem of that organism inside the skin. I mean, without our own skin, we can say we're our true selves, or that's my mind talking. I think that's fine for our own behavior. But when we're trying to influence another human's behavior or another critter's behavior, if we see the problem as inside of them, it gives us nothing to do. The only way that we have any power to influence another organism's behavior is by assigning the influence on the context, because that's the only thing we can change. We can change the context to help them think differently or behave differently.
So I feel like that those last couple sentences there could be unpacked for a really long time, and I'm not suggesting we spend, you know, the next couple hours together, but I'm wanting you to help on that specific point about seeing the problem as outside of the person. In this case, we're talking clinically.
Or the solution, or the goodness, or whatever. Yeah. I use the word problem, but you know, seeing the influence on behavior as outside the person. Go ahead.
What are there any articles or books that you would suggest to listeners or myself to really help me sit with this? Because I feel like this is something I need to sit with and to really wrap my everything around.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to what I was saying at the beginning. I don't know this through data. I know this through my own teaching of undergraduate students, and I know this through my working with clients, not psychological clients, but people who have to do things in the world. Practicing this, seeing your behavior as influencing the context for another human or another organism's behavior. So behaving in a way that changes the environment, that changes somebody else's behavior,
Okay.
is important. And I think you have to practice it. Now, of course, I've got articles that I really love. I mean, I love Linda Parrott Hayes' Listening and Understanding article.
Mm-hmm.
I love her Equivalences Process article. There's lots and lots of articles that I think are important. And I really think practicing this is the way to do it. And, you know, a cat or a rat or a dog.
What about some like nonverbal interactions with other humans? Is there any?
Yeah, I think that's good. So one of my favorite things to get students to do is to, instead of clicker training a cat or a dog or a rat, or one of the most fun, I had a student clicker train a lizard, a pet lizard. It was fantastic. But besides that, I think one of the things to get them to do is something similar, the tag teach that I talked about earlier, the teaching with acoustical guidance. Getting somebody who's good at something, so for example, basketball or a dance move, to teach somebody else to do that without words and just using clicks really starts to get them to understand how my behavior changes the environment for you that changes your behavior. And then your behavior changes the interactions, behavior context, simpler format. I think it's important. Okay. And you know, if you don't have somebody who can teach a dance move to, like my nephew is trying to teach me to do the flossy dance. I'm very bad at it. If you don't have a human that you can do that with, watch a bunch of videos on YouTube. There's hundreds of them.
All right. Okay. And did I take you away from where you wanted to go when we were talking about the functional analysis? In terms
I have no idea.
Okay. All right.
That's been minutes ago.
Okay. We won't do a functional analysis of that comment. So okay, what else? What else do we need to you're the real professor here. So
oh no, I'm not sure that's true here. I don't know. I'm just going to say the same thing. I think with any interaction, if you are in charge of making, influencing the environment to make that other human or critter's behavior different, then you need to start with backwards design. Pick the organism, pick the behavior, measure the behavior, and see how you can change the environment to get them to do it. So pick the organism, pick the behavior, measure to see what they can do already, and then change the environment. And then measure again.
Yeah, you are a measurement person. I just want to mention that as we
if you're not measuring, you're just practicing. I mean, you might as well measure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your perspective on this, and it's I feel like it's another can of worms I'm opening up, and I'm excited about diving into.
So I was approaching this with some trepidation because I was thinking what my thoughts on this and saying them out loud might be somewhat aversive to you rather than appetitive.
Okay.
And I can like put words around like why I thought that. And I felt like you're doing a deep dive and I'm saying, yeah, you do that, but how about you take a step back and go off the little diving board first?
Yeah.
You don't have to go with the big one first.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. And that's yeah.
Take that little one. And there's probably lots of listeners who have already taken and practiced those little dives, and that they'll be fine to go straight for Catania or any of those kind of writings.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of us who aren't.
Yeah. No, I have started this journey, wanting to be led, and I'm really grateful for you being willing to take me down what you were concerned would be a holy sundowning. Oh, I can't think of my behavioral language. I wouldn't like it. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
aversive.
Aversive. That was a long sentence. I really struggled there.
I bet you're laughing, so maybe it's not so aversive. Maybe laughing about it. Okay.
No, it's really I love it.
Yeah, I think it may be this way of thinking. That is that the biggest influence of behavior is in the environment and not stuff you can't access. I think this way of thinking brings with it some clarity. It clarifies your job. I think it also can be aversive because when things aren't going your way, the only way to look is your own behavior. If you assume that you can impact the environment to impact another organism's behavior, if that environment isn't impacting the organism in the way that you hoped, then the only place to look is at your own behavior. So I think it is freeing in some ways. It gives you something to do, change the environment. But I also think in some circumstances, it's a little confining. Like, when things aren't going my way in a class, for example, I'm teaching online this semester. It's not the best class I've ever taught. And, where can I look? I can look, like a pandemic is causing this, but also my behavior is the only thing that can impact that class. That's the only thing I control is my own behavior. And so, in some ways, this way of thinking is both freeing and it's confining.
Okay. And are those speaking of confining, those rats, they look pretty happy. Yeah. It looks more like there might be cocaine than electricity in that.
It's
box.
there are probably some appetites in the separate chamber.
Yeah. Okay. So let me. What did I do here? Okay. Well, I think that's a good place for us to kind of step away. What do you think, Kate?
Sure. It's your podcast. You get to decide.
I really love your approach and your kindness to us beginners here. Want to mention that your website, which I'll put a link to, I see contingencies, is an awesome website with a lot of good information there on these topics and fun stuff. I'm sure we could talk about maybe some common science fiction we both like. I don't know.
Yeah.
So you're available for consultation. You do consultation on student learning and anything having to do with measurement. Thanks so much, Kate.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I'm getting stronger. They take a piece of me. But I'm getting stronger. They take a piece of me. But I'm getting stronger. They take a piece of me.